I'd like to welcome in now criminal defense attorney Josh Ritter, host of the podcast Courtroom Confidential. Josh, thank you so much for your time on this. First of all, just how significant is this request by the DA? How often does something like this happen?
It's incredibly significant. The idea of resentencing is not all that uncommon, but the idea of resentencing based upon the reasons that he gave is pretty extraordinary. In that press conference, he talked about how they performed in prison, how they've been exemplary, how a lot of time has passed. But what he didn't talk about is how, if there has been any change in the law that allows for this, and there really hasn't been. Usually when you have a resentencing, that's based on some change in the law. Some sentencing guideline has changed, and a defendant who's in custody is asking to be resentenced according to those new guidelines. Here, it's based simply on the idea that he thinks, taking a look back at a case that's 30 years old, that they've served enough time and that he feels that's appropriate. So when you look at it through that perspective, it is pretty extraordinary.
So, Josh, so the office is recommending they receive sentences of 50 years to life with the possibility of parole. And because they were under 26 when the crimes occurred, they would be immediately eligible. But is a judge likely to release them on parole, and how quickly could that happen?
That's a really good question. So the first step, there's a lot to unpack here. The first step is to make this petition, and your reporter was correct. It's only a request. They're saying we would like to have a special circumstance murder, a murder where they're serving life without the possibility of parole, reduced to a standard first-degree murder, which would allow for parole. So 25 to life on each count of murder, 50 to life, and then given their age at the time, it would make them eligible for parole now. If that first obstacle is passed, the idea that a judge even goes along with this, a judge agrees with this recommendation from the DA and from the defense attorneys, then it still has to go before a parole board. So ultimately, it's going to be a parole board who will make a decision on whether or not to parole them. And we don't know, it's anyone's guess, when that parole hearing could actually take place. So there's still many steps ahead of these two men.
All right, so Josh, how important is this evidence? This evidence the DA says he's going to present to the judge, including that letter written by Erik allegedly 8 months before the murders, detailing sexual abuse from his father, even though some people question the timing of when that letter was actually written. There's also this claim from a former boy band member that Jose Menendez raped him. How important is this evidence?
The evidence was important because it gave the defense attorneys an opportunity to file that habeas petition. But what's happening now is kind of separate and apart from that. And in fact, interestingly, Gascon didn't really mention that new evidence in arriving at his decision. He's basically saying that the new interests in this case, including the Netflix series that recently came out and requests to his office, have asked him to essentially reevaluate this case and take another look. And just based upon how much time has passed, a cultural shift in how we view sex abuse and victims of sex abuse, and just the way that they've demonstrated that what he feels is a rehabilitated attitude, that he feels that they're entitled to this resentencing.
Last question for you. We know Kitty Menendez's brother is against this, but we also know that more than 24 Menendez family members attended the news conference. They are for this resentencing. How will that all potentially play a role in the judge's decision?
The judge has a really difficult decision ahead of them. Here's the thing. Most importantly, judges want to uphold jury verdicts. We want there to be finality in our criminal justice system. So the idea of overturning a verdict based upon requests from even victims' family members, requests from even the DA's office is still going to be a difficult decision. And you point out correctly that it's not all the family members who are in favor of this. Some are opposed to it and filing amicus briefs asking the court not to go along with this. So it's a difficult decision. I do not envy that judge. I would say that it probably leans in favor of a resentencing, given the idea that the DA favors this, but it's not a for sure thing by a long shot.
We will see what happens. Josh Ritter, thank you so much for weighing in.
Thank you for having me.